Hello everyone. Thank you for contacting me and asking me such good questions about the World War, the Second World War. I will do my best to answer your questions. And I thought that instead of just answering your questions straight up and down, I would try to give you a more comprehensive reasoning, and hopefully this will capture all of your questions as well. Alright, so let's go. The first question you asked me was, were the Swedish people ever afraid of the Nazis invading our country? And the answer to this question is yes. But we were also afraid of the Soviet Union. And I will explain why. But let me first just give you a little bit of background to the Second World War. So early in 1939, Europe looked something like this, with Nazi Germany having a dominant position in Central Europe. Hitler was way forward in his plans to throw Europe into the bloodiest war the world has ever seen. However, he was not alone with his imperialistic ambitions. And this has a major importance on how Sweden's political position turned out in the war. And one of the most important events that actually happened prior to the outbreak of the war was on the 23rd of August 1939. This was a date when Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union signed a defensive pact. And this agreement had a secret protocol, a secret section, where the Nazis and the Soviets divided Eastern Europe among themselves. And according to this protocol, in the north, Finland, Estonia, and Latvia were assigned to the Soviet Union on one side, while Poland was divided in two parts, where the Soviet Union were getting the eastern part, and Nazi Germany was getting the western part. And so with this agreement in place, World War II was ready to start for real. And on the 1st of September, only 9 days after the signing of this collaboration pact, Nazi Germany invaded Poland from the west, and a few weeks after this, Soviet Russia invaded Poland from the east. And they divided the country between themselves, according to the agreement. So what else happened on the Eastern Front? Well, early on in World War II, the Soviet Union continued its expansion by attacking Finland, and very soon they also occupied the Baltic states. But let's focus on Finland for a while, because this is really important in order to be able to answer your questions correctly. Because World War II, the Second World War, can never fully be understood unless you take the so-called Winter Wars in consideration. In Sweden, the people felt a very strong solidarity with Finland when the Soviet Union attacked. And we also feared Russia. There has been a lot of bloody conflicts between Sweden and Russia throughout history. And so now, when Russia once again were attacking Finland, there were very strong public opinion in Sweden that we should help Finland and fight the Soviet Union. However, our political leaders were very split. They didn't know what to do, and we ended up taking a neutral position, where we officially were neutral in the conflict, but unofficially we were actually helping Finland to fight, or throughout the war we were helping Finland. Thousands upon thousands of volunteers, Swedish volunteers, went to the Eastern Front to fight Soviet Russia against or to fight together with the Finns against Soviet Russia. And the government sent lots of ammunition, food, medicines, clothes, and you know it. And we actually even lended out 1/3 of our air force to the Finns so that they could fight Soviet Union. So this was going on the Eastern Front early on in World War II. But what was happening on the Western Front? Well, this is where your book, Number the Stars, starts to cover some parts. Well, early on in the war, Nazi Germany occupied both Denmark and Norway. making Sweden squeezing Sweden in a very tricky geopolitical position between these totalitarian monsters of Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. And from this position, Sweden ended up actually helping and resisting Nazi Germany. Sweden also developed a very close collaboration with the Western allies. And you might ask, how is this possible? How could Sweden both be collaborating with Nazi Germany and with the Western allies at the same time? And this is a really important question that has no short answer, but you can understand this position by looking at our government at the time. You see, when the Soviet Union attacked Finland, Sweden realized that we were under external threat, and our political leaders, they needed to act. However, our politicians were very split and didn't know what to do, like I was saying. So it ended up in a great compromise in our history. And in this compromise, all major political parties agreed to put their political differences aside and work together for the good of the Swedish people, whatever the cost. And in this great compromise, all political leaders agreed to put their political differences aside and work together for the good of the Swedish people, no matter what happened throughout this bloody conflict. So they agreed to form a coalition government, a wide coalition government, where all major parties were represented. Only two parties in our parliament were not accepted into this government, and that was the Swedish Communist Party and the Socialist Party. And the reason for this was, of course, that the Swedish Communist Party were actually collaborating with the Soviet Union, so they were of course not allowed into the government. The Socialist Party, on the other side, they were sympathizing with Nazi Germany, and eventually they would also get money and financial support from Nazi Germany, and so they were not trusted. But that's a different story. So our government was working for the good of the Swedish people, no matter what. Now, there are many things that Sweden can be proud of in this position. And there are other things that bring about some shame to the Swedish position. One of the good things were actually covered in your book. I'm talking about how Sweden helped to save almost all Jews living in Denmark. And very successfully, very good, saved many lives, thousands of lives. And in fact, tens of thousands of Jews in Europe were actually saved thanks to Swedish policies. And you asked me, does Sweden have a large Jewish population now, probably as a result of this? And the answer is that we never had a big Jewish population in Sweden. However, the population did increase significantly as a result of World War II and the terrible things that happened to the Jews in Nazi Germany. And you also asked me if Swedes were happy to receive Jewish refugees. And the answer to this is mostly yes. Of course, not everyone were happy about receiving Jewish refugees, but the vast majority of the Swedish public were happy to help the Jews. And they were also shocked and astonished by the way the Nazis had treated and murdered Jews. But like I said, there are also things that bring about shame in Sweden. I'm talking about, for example, how we had continuous trade with Nazi Germany and thereby supported their war machine with a lot of resources. We also allowed German troops to pass through our territory at several times. And all of this was part of a very careful diplomatic balancing act that the Swedish government were executing. For example, during the invasion of Norway, Nazi Germany demanded access to the telephone and telegraph lines from Germany to Norway. And under the threat of war, the Swedish government approved this, but at the same time, Sweden tapped the lines and shared the intelligence with the British government. And as a matter of fact, even though Sweden collaborated with Germany, if you add up the different activities, the collaborations with the Western allies went a lot farther than they ever did with Nazi Germany. In hindsight, many argue that Sweden's position in the war, as the neutral position in the war, was opportunistic and morally wrong. But personally, I don't pass a very strong judgment upon the political leaders of the time. I mean, it's very easy for us here today to say that the political leaders should have joined the war and sacrificed hundreds of thousands of Swedish lives for the good sake. Perhaps this would have been a very noble position to take. But I can also see something good in political leaders that can put their political differences aside to work for the good of the nation. And perhaps that's something that other nations should implement more often as well. Now, I want to address another of your questions. Someone asked me if I think that the World War II was good for the Swedish people. And many would argue against me here, but my short answer to your question is no. World War II was not good for the Swedish public or the Swedish population. And this is because a lot of material and human capital was ruined in the war. This is resources that could have been invested more productively, but instead they were wasted in the war. And to argue in any other way is a broken window policy. Now, I don't have time to elaborate on that answer, but or instead I would like to tell you a story. You asked me if I knew stories about certain Germans, and in one of your older clips you asked me if I had a family story. And I do know of several stories that I've heard of and that have been told to me, but I wanted to share a story that's not really connected to the war, but that's more closely connected to me. I want to show you this. This is one of my favorite historical relics that I own. This was given to my mom a couple of weeks after I was born, and she was instructed to keep this safe. And if you look closely at it, you will see that it has my personal number here and here, and it also has my full name written here. And in the corner you will see 3 crowns symbolizing Swedish citizens. In the other corner you will find my blood type imprinted here. And on the back side it says personal, keep it safe. So what exactly is this, and what is it for? Well, this was created during the Cold War, when the world was divided between the democratic nations of the West and the communist nations of the East. And here in Sweden, the government were preparing for the potential war and making preparations in whatever way they could. And one way to do this was to look at the Second World War and other conflicts to see what happened there, what problems arose, and what could we do to prepare for them and mitigate them. And one problem that they noticed was that there were a mass death of people. There were a lot of unnamed graves and mass graves that were impossible to sort out. In many places in Europe, and perhaps in Eastern Europe in particular, there are huge amounts of mass graves left after Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. In many places in Europe, there are entire forests that have been turned into memorial sites. There are lots of people that died or were murdered in those forests, but the locals, they don't know how many or who exactly, but they still know that somewhere out there in that forest my relatives lies. Of course, if the Soviet Union had bombed Sweden with nuclear bombs, there would have been a lot of death and bodies to handle as a result of that war. So the Swedish government thought, how can we mitigate this problem? How can we deal with all of these bodies? And this is the practical response. This is my body tag. It's given to me a couple of days after I was born, a couple of weeks, a few weeks after I was born. And this could be used if I would get wounded or die as a result of Soviet Union bombing my home. Every child in Sweden up to 9, born prior to 93 or 94, I don't remember which year, prior to 93 or 94, have gotten one of these. And our parents were instructed to keep this safe, and in case of war, we were obliged to wear them at all times. And if I would get wounded, then my blood type is written here, so I could get treatment quickly. And if I die, if I would have died, my body could be identified using this tag. And this tag also has a practical solution. You see these markings here? Well, this is made so it can be easily be cut, so that one part of the tag can be left on my body, while the other part of the tag can be collected for the data gathering, which is also very important when you're dealing with mass graves and a lot of dead people. Now, I think this is pretty amazing, because this shows how real the terror of the Cold War was on people's daily life. Imagine my mother. She's just given birth to a son, and one of the first things that she gets from the government is my body tag, and together with instructions to keep it safe at all times and to be used in the war. And that's what my mother did. She kept it safe for over 20 years before she finally passed it on to me. That was my story. Thank you for listening.